Hey guys, Tom Southern, Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument. Today I want to talk with you guys about the political and historical factors which led us to be here, and I want to do it from a Native American perspective, okay? All right, so the big question: why was the United States embarked on an unprovoked military invasion of an independent nation which happened to already exist within what later came to be declared the United States? Well, when he was an old man, Red Cloud said, "The white man made us many promises, but he only kept one of them. He promised to take our land and he took it." All right, but we want to know, how did that big question and Red Cloud's answer play out right here on the banks of the Little Bighorn River on June 25th, 1876? And to do that, we'll start with the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, in which negotiations between the Crow people and the United States government led to an 11.3 million acre reservation right here in southeastern Montana. And negotiations between the Sioux Nation and the United States government led to what was called the Great Sioux Reservation, which encompassed the entire western half of what is now the state of South Dakota, including the Black Hills. All right, the land in between northeastern Wyoming, southeastern Montana, was deemed by the treaty to be unceded territory reserved for the exclusive use of the Sioux, and it specifically excluded white people. Well, at that point, Two Moons, a Northern Cheyenne warrior who fought here, he said, "We thought things would be okay. That we would live here and the white man would live there." And for a few years here on the northern Great Plains, things were relatively just fine. Okay, now not so on the central and southern Great Plains. There in southern Nebraska, all of Kansas, eastern Colorado, most of Oklahoma, and the Texas Panhandle, for the last 20 years, Native people had been being attacked by the government because they had been fighting and defending their land against the intrusions from the settlers, the colonists, the Euro-Americans, the white people, whatever you want to call it. All right. And in addition to that, there was the Native people had no inherited immunity to many of the diseases that the white people brought over from Europe. Okay. Just as in one example, in 1849 alone, just 1 year, one disease, cholera, killed half of the Native people that lived on the central and southern Great Plains. Wow, think about that in terms of what we're going through today, okay? And then lastly, the buffalo herds anybody could see that the herds were getting smaller and smaller on the central and southern Great Plains, okay? But again, things were relatively okay up here on the northern Great Plains. So you say, well, then what in the world happened? Why are we even here? Financial panic of 1873 is the reason, all right? So like our Great Recession of 2008 that it makes you go, "Oh, okay, I know we should study history, but it's so boring. Can you make it a little more interesting?" I'm trying. I'm going to try, okay? The same cause, the same effect, and the same solution. All right, in 2008, what was the cause? Like it always is, speculation in the financial markets by Wall Street banks and financiers. Okay. In 2008, it was speculation in what? Derivatives and mortgage-backed securities, whatever that is, all right? In 1873, it was speculation in railroad stocks. Okay, the same effect, always. 20% unemployment, plummeting wages, and a kind of fear-based anger about anybody that's different. You know what I'm talking about. We still see it here today. Back then in 1873, if immigrants would get off the boats in New York City and be walking down the streets, and there'd be signs on the bars and the restaurants that would say, "No Germans, no Irish, and no dogs." Okay. And yet, I don't know if you can see it, but from behind me, the monument up here, there's the names of 262 young soldiers who died here that day. Greatly disproportionate number of Irish and German surnames. Now, why would that be? Okay, the pay was $13 a month Okay, the food was horrible, very non-existent fringe benefits, and you could get killed. But it was like, for a lot of the immigrants coming, it's the only job there was, the only job they could get. Okay, all right, and now the same solution. Always, we need more dollar bills to stimulate the economy. Today, I think the Federal Reserve just punches some computer keys, and the next thing you know, a few $1 trillion are sitting in JP Morgan's and Wells Fargo and Citibank's bank accounts, and that's all somehow supposed to trickle on down to us, all right? Well, but back then, we were on what was called the gold standard, and you needed gold. Remember Fort Knox, to back up dollar bills. Well, I mean, you think about it, the gold rush to California, the gold fields in northwestern Montana, the gold in the Rocky Mountains, and even in the 1840s, the gold in the hills of North Georgia, which led to the ethnic cleansing and the Trail of Tears of the Cherokees. Okay. Well, there'd always been rumors of gold in the Black Hills. Remember, the Black Hills belonged to the Sioux from the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. All right. Ulysses S Grant was the president now. And for all the early years of his administration, historians have viewed him as having a peace policy with regard to Native people. But in 1874, two things happened which make it clear to us that the administration is changing its tune. Okay, remember we mentioned the decimation of the buffalo herds down on the central and southern Great Plains? In 1874, Congress did something that you would have just been so proud of. Recognizing that rate of decimation from the killing and disease and just the usurpation of the land, you take away 1 million acres of land that's buffalo land and put cows and wheat field on it, well, there's a lot less land for buffalo. All those factors, you put them all together and people could see that the buffalo were headed for extinction. So Congress, in this beautiful move, they pass a law that not only forbid the commercial slaughter of buffalo, so you figured it had to be no commercial buffalo slaughter in Lobby, right? But they also made it illegal for any white person to kill a female buffalo, which was beautiful recognition that, hello guys, you kill all the females, you don't stand a chance of resuscitating the herds, okay? Grant vetoes the bill. Now, as my grandmother would have said, anybody with the brains God gifted a louse knows that he did the wrong thing. So why did he do that? Because his War Department wanted him to. Well, why did his War Department want him to do that? Because it was way too expensive to kill Native people on the Great Plains. It's big out here, guys. It's really big. And the Indian women were so good at breaking down their teepees and, the travelers' poles that would run down the sides of the horses and throw the teepee covers and the little babies onto the traveler, and just given a few hours head start, soldiers they'd lose them. They'd lose the soldiers. All right. But the War Department figured, if we kill the buffalo, if we get rid of the buffalo, we'll starve them to death. I mean, they need the buffalo for food and clothing and shelter. And if we can reduce them to a point of starvation and subservience, well, they'll do what we want. Okay, so Grant vetoes the bill. All right. Also in 1874, President Grant commissions Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, who was the same George Custer that died up here at the top of that hill, to lead an expedition into the Black Hills. I'm sure it was legal because attorneys wrote the treaty, but it sure violated the spirit of the Fort Laramie Treaty. All right, 1,000 men, 300 wagons, all kinds of support staff, and also including newspapermen, geologists, and miners. So, hello, we know why he went there, right? Okay, and of course they find the gold. All right. Now, within 2 years, there are more miners in the Black Hills than there are Sioux in the entire Sioux Nation. And to the Sioux, if they would use the modern words that we use today, surely they would say, they would label the miners illegal aliens, right? But what are they going to do? I mean, we literally outnumber them to literally 2,000 to 1. And whereas, we're guessing here, you know, but maybe if we guess, whereas half the native people, warriors that fought here today, fought with steel-tipped arrows, we had just finished slaughtering ourselves in the Civil War with military technology that most of the native people didn't even know existed. All right. Grant goes to the Sioux and he says, okay, look, let us buy the Black Hills from you. And most of the Sioux say, we're not selling the dust and blood of our ancestors. He goes, all right, yeah, look, all we want is the gold. Just let us lease the land from you and then we'll give it back to you. We've been down that road with you white people before, and we can't trust you. Your word is no good. All right, well, Grant, he knows he's going into the Black Hills now. It's just, how is he going to present this to the American people? And his administration says, you know, just tell them that the native people have been committing depredations against the miners in the Black Hills, and so for that reason, you're going to revoke the treaty. Okay. Regardless of the fact that we got a little rain. We just got rain down for a second there, guys. Regardless of the fact that the latest report by the Bureau of Indian Affairs to the administration had just said that the last year on the Northern Great Plains had been the most peaceful year that they'd ever had. Okay. Grant, in 1865, issues a proclamation in which he essentially says to the native people on the unceded territory, I don't care what the treaty says. I don't care that we wrote the treaty. I don't care that you're not in violation of the treaty. I'm telling you, you have until January 31st to remove yourselves to the agencies in South Dakota and northwestern Nebraska, or I'm going to turn you over to the War Department. And of course, Grant never once attempted to explain the question which he begged to be answered, which is, hey, if all you wanted is the Black Hills, and you've already got the Black Hills, and the native people are 300 miles away up here in the unceded territory, and for the most part just minding their own business, why are you even remotely interested in attacking them in the first place? All right, so be that as it may, January 31st, 1876 rolls around, and Grant turns it over to the War Department. Now, who's his War Department? His two favorite generals from the Civil War, William Tecumseh Sherman and Philip Sheridan. Now, Sherman, if he'd had his way, he was in favor of what we surely would call today a policy of genocide. In fact, in a conversation with President Grant one time, he said, listen, if we have to exterminate them, every man, woman, and child, so be it. And Sherman said to Sheridan one time, listen, the more you kill this year, the less you got to kill next year, okay? And Sheridan, of course, is famous for having said, hey, the only good Indians I ever saw were dead. All right. Okay, but by now, Grant has not hired them to come out here and throw a barbecue and beer festival on the banks of the Little Bighorn River. He's hired them to come up with a plan to kill native people. The plan, real quickly. 3 Army units, 2,500 soldiers. The 2 Army groups that concern us the most will be the 1,200 men coming with General George Crook from the south down here in Wyoming and from Fort Fetterman. And coming from the east over here was General Alfred Terry, and serving under him, Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer in the 7th Cavalry. All right, guys, that gives us a pretty good idea of why the United States was embarked on an unprovoked military invasion. Now, we have some questions that we want to ask about the native side. At the time that they were declared hostiles by the federal government, there were maybe 3,000 to 4,000 native people living out here on the unceded territory. But our best estimates were the 1,200 teepees, 20,000 to 25,000 pony herd, was that there were maybe 6,000 to 8,000 people here on the day of the battle, native people. You go, How did we double the population in such a short period of time? All right, well, we've got three reasons for that, guys. One, Native people were starving on the reservations. The annuities, which were part of the treaty agreement, sometimes they didn't come. And when they came, maybe, the bacon would be moldy and the flour would have worms in it, and the cattle, which were supposed to supplement or supplant the buffalo, would just be skin and bones. And so you could imagine Native mothers and fathers saying, there are still buffalo up there on the northern Great Plains, the Powder River country. To heck with what the proclamation said. We've got children to feed, let's go. All right. So more came. All right. The second reason was a man named Sitting Bull, political and spiritual leader of the people who lived out here on the unceded territory. Sitting Bull participates in a great medicine or sun dance 20 miles away over here on the Rosebud Creek. And in keeping with the belief that the only thing that in this world that we truly own is our body. So if we want to sacrifice, we sacrifice our flesh. Sitting Bull has a medicine man take 50 flesh offerings from each of his arms. And for 2 days he dances, beseeching the everywhere spirit, seeking for himself vision, prophecy, and power, and for his people providence. No food, no water. After 2 days, the next morning, the morning of the third day, he collapses. And when he comes to, he reports seeing a vision of soul. He sees soldiers falling into camp head first, and a voice that says to him, I give you these because they have no ears. All right. Well, obviously the prophecy is that the village will be attacked, but that the village will be successful in defending itself. And that the soldiers have no ears. All right, remember 2 moons. We live here, you live there. Just leave us alone, okay? Just leave us alone. But because the soldiers won't leave them alone, all right, etc. Okay, so now when more people here on the reservations hear about Sitting Bull's big medicine, they want to be here physically in that kind of emotional, spiritual space, all right? All right, the third reason, maybe the saddest reason, all right? On some level, all of these people, whether they articulated or if it was unarticulated, surely sensed that this would be the last summer that they would ever be able to live their lives as free people, live the old wild way, They surely sensed, many of them, that this was an epochal moment in the history of their people. And they didn't want to miss it, okay? So more came. All right, we're almost there, guys. We're almost there. Now, sandwiched between the battle that was here on June 25th, 1876, right down there, and right behind me, and Sitting Bull's big medicine dance on the Rosebud Creek in early June, was a battle that was equally as important, just not as famous. All right. Remember General Crook coming up from Wyoming territory. June the 16th, Cheyenne scouts come back to the village and report, hey, there's soldiers, and they're only a day's ride away. Now, almost invariably, if Plains people knew that soldiers were coming to attack them, they ran. Well, think about it. It wasn't like it was the United States Army attacking the Cheyenne Army. No, it was the United States Army attacking a civilian population, all right? And the soldiers were always better armed and almost always outnumbered the native warriors, all right? So remember on the southern Great Plains how fast the Indian women could be gone. It's as if they had said to their husbands, just buy us a few hours. Buy us a few hours. We'll be gone. Just hold them off. So the warriors would always fight what we would call a rear guard action. Okay. But this time they didn't do that. Instead, that night, 800 warriors and at least one woman rode all night long through the Wolf Mountains over here, through the Wolf Mountains. And early in the morning, warriors with the medicine of thunder dreamers and storm splitters and dragonflies and hawks, led by men like Lame White Man and Crazy Horse, came pouring, like one author said, like birds, like furious birds of prey, pouring down onto Crook's troops there on the banks of Rosebud Creek. Battle lasted about 6 hours. Both sides fought really well. The soldiers were led, all the officers were veterans of the bloodbaths of the Civil War. One officer, Colonel Anson Mills, cavalry officer, in 1917 was talking to a group of veterans, and he said, right then and there, the Sioux and the Cheyenne proved that they were the greatest light cavalry on the face of the earth. He said, why did he say that? He said that because though the soldiers would charge the warriors and the warriors would retreat, the warriors would turn around and come at them. He said, like flocks of birds or herds of buffalo, and attack them on the flank. And the warriors just pressed the attack all day long. They would retreat and come at them again, and come at them on their flanks. And they came at them not in this organized way that the soldiers were used to fighting, but in this way where all these warriors are fighting with their own personal medicine, okay? The soldiers expended 20 to 25,000 rounds of ammunition, and Anson Mills would explain, well, the reason they did was because you couldn't hit them. The warriors would lay over on the side of their horse, hanging on with one leg, okay, and shoot from underneath their horse's neck. Okay, you know, we couldn't hit them. There was nothing to shoot at. In the middle of that battle, there's something that's just so cool. Such a good story. Comes in sight, Northern Cheyenne warriors, had his horse shot out from under him, and he's near an infantry line. He's too far away for any of the other warriors to be able to come and rescue him. Soldiers are closing in on him, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, comes this diminutive little figure racing her pony back and forth in a zigzag pattern to make it harder for her to be shot at. She whips up behind her brother, comes inside, helps him onto her horse, and while they're both being shot at, she rides them both to safety. Okay. And so to this day, over here on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, while the rest of the world refers to this as the Battle at Rosebud Creek, the Northern Cheyenne continue to call it the battle where the sister saved her brother. And that young woman, Buffalo Calf Road woman, also fought 8 days later, right out here. The testimony we have from another Cheyenne woman named Antelope was that maybe a mile and a half, right over here, okay? She did the same thing again. This time she had a 6-shooter and she used it, okay? Whew, all right, guys, we're here. We're ready for the battle. June 25th, 1876, it was a hot day. The famous black elk, the holy man black elk, was a little 12-year-old boy. He said, yeah, it was hot. He said, and men and women and their little bear babies were swimming in the river. We knew there were soldiers around, but we had no idea we were going to be attacked. All right. Young men and women had been dancing all night long. And just like young women and men today who've been out dancing all night long, they're sleeping late. They were sleeping. Many of them were still asleep when the soldiers first attacked the village. They'd been celebrating the victory over Crook at the battle where the sister saved her brother. Well, and just also, you know, wanting the social dance, okay? All right, there's so many amazing stories that other rangers will give you about the details of this battle. We don't have time for that today. I'm going to give you a concise and accurate little story of it, and then we'll move on a little bit to what happened, the consequences, and what happened after the battle. Okie doke. Knowing full well how terrifying a cavalry charge into an unsuspecting village civilian population can be. I mean, just imagine, guys, just imagine it, okay? All right, Custer is coming down out of the Wolf Mountains here, and the Indian village is on the other side of the river. he sends some of his troops to cross the river and attack the southern end of the village. It's about a 1.5 mile long village, okay? Knowing full well what's going to happen. Warriors will come to check that attack. Women and children will come north towards where we are now, okay? And Custer, knowing that in the only other major battle he'd had with Indian people, he was saved by the fact that he had captured women and children and was then able to use them as body shields, in which when other warriors were to come, he's able to say, guys, I got your girls. You know, I mean, what are you going to do? Well, what they're going to do is whatever Custer tells them to do. All right, so he goes, I'm going to do that again today. All right, so while the warriors are dealing with the soldiers that I sent to attack the southern end of the village, I'm going to come down along these ridges here behind me, and at a place my Crow Scouts have told me, it's called Medicine Tail Coulee, I'm going down to the river. And those women and children, hopefully I'll be able to time it just right, you know, okay? So here we are, there's 4 columns of cavalry trotting down Medicine Tail Coulee to the river. A young Cheyenne mother's got her 2 little girls by her hands. And one of the little girls says, Mama, who are those men up there? You know, maybe she'd never seen soldiers, maybe seen white people before. And her mother says, those are the men who have come to kill us. The little girl fainted on the spot. Okay. Custer's troops were never able to make it across the river because the plan fell apart from the beginning. Those soldiers who were attacking the southern end of the village, not only did they never make it into the village, they were repulsed. And not only were they repulsed, they were routed and ended up about 3 miles away down here on another hilltop and never were a part of this battle again. So when Custer's men are trotting down the Medicine Tail Coulee hoping to cross the river and get the women and children, there were too many Sioux and Cheyenne and they stopped them. So Custer comes back up to what we call Battle Ridge up here, and he deploys some more of his troops and says, guys, hold these Indians back, because at this point warriors are beginning to come up through all these draws and coulees and ravines in here, hiding in the brush behind the sagebrush, and they're coming in larger and larger numbers. Okay, so he's charging some of his troops now, hold them back, because I'm going to go one more time. I'm going to go a little bit further, maybe another 1/2 mile down from here, and I'm going to cross the river, and then I'm going to get them, okay? So if you hold them back and let me do that, we'll still be all right. So now, here's this other amazing moment in history, guys. Here comes Custer down to the river, and at this point, there are maybe 4,000 old men, women, and children on the other side of the river, and they can probably both groups see each other. Here's the soldiers coming down, and here's the panicked old men, women, and children. And the soldiers are going, if we can only get across, we'll be home free. And the women and children looking at them. Now maybe they're not like 50 feet away, but thinking, oh my God, if they get across, oh my God. Well, one more time, Sioux and Cheyenne warriors backed them up, and they couldn't cross. So now Custer comes back up to this famous area that we've always have referred to as Last Stand Hill, and the remnants of the men that he had left all along this 1/2 mile stretch of Battle Ridge, what's left of them, they retreat and join him at Last Stand Hill, which is behind us. All those little white spots are the headstones, and you can see the monument. And at that point, now I'm trying to give you what it must have been like those last 30 minutes or so. Warriors are waving blankets to scare the horses, so the horses will panic, and the men who are holding the horses will have to let go of them, and other warriors, remember I said half of them are shooting with steel-tipped arrows. Well, if you're down in those ravines, you don't have to expose yourself and stand up to shoot with a rifle and then expose yourself to being shot. You can be down in those ravines and just arch those steel-tipped arrows into the sky. They will come down and wound both men and horses and panic more horses. So hundreds of arrows are coming down on the soldiers and their horses. All right, and now Wooden Leg and Big Beaver and Two Moons and other warriors report that it was just so much noise and dust and confusion. And the soldiers, at one point, they shot a number of their horses so that they could use them for breastwork, to crawl behind and hide. They're up there on that hill. They got the high ground, but they're still exposed, okay? And Wooden Leg said, there was so much dust, and these old-fashioned ammunition made dark smoke. He said, we could see the outline of the horses laying on the ground, but we couldn't really see the individual soldiers. So all we were shooting at was the fire that was coming out of their rifles. Okay? And then at some point, it's not like they could look and see, oh, we killed them all, but they just reported, we heard no more shots coming from the hill. And so we rushed the hill and killed the rest of them. Okay, so then you think, well, all right, so that's the story, right? Nah, because remember, June 24th, 1876. It's not 10 days later until it's July 4th, 1876, the nation's centennial celebration, where the nation is celebrating all these glorious documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights, and these beautiful notions of freedom and justice and fairness and equality, and all the technological achievements of this burgeoning industrial imperial power. And now they also have to figure out how do we factor in that the Union's most famous Indian Civil War cavalry officer and the nation's premier Indian fighter has just been killed by a group of people that we think are nothing more than one step out of the Stone Age. Now, how are we going to make sense out of that? So the nation's got to do that. And the Army is furious, and they vow revenge. I mean, they have been humiliated. I mean, they were whipped at the battle where the sister saved her brother, and the soldiers outmanned them maybe 1,200 to 800, and they were still whipped. And they came within a hair's breadth of being annihilated here at the Little Bighorn. So they vow revenge, and late in 1876, they surprise a northern Cheyenne village, which included Buffalo Calf Road woman, on a tributary of the Powder River in Wyoming, northern Wyoming territory. They burned the village, all the teepees, all the buffalo robes, all the dried buffalo meat for the winter, all the religious artifacts and personal belongings, those men and women and children which were not killed in the initial attack, and run. They literally run with what they can grab out of their hands as they run out of their teepees and with the clothes they have on their back. And the soldiers get the teepee, they get the pony herds as well. And now these people, Northern Cheyenne, face a 10-day walk to Crazy Horse's village. It's 20 below zero that first night. 20 below zero. 11 babies freeze to death that first night. The next day, the warriors are able to recapture most of the pony herd. And so now they have something for the old people to ride on, and they have something to eat. And at night, after they would kill the horses, slice open their bellies, pull out their insides, and in that steaming wet body cavity, put the little babies, hoping that the babies would stay warm enough to still be awake when the sun came up. Still, for the next 10 days, by the time they got to Crazy Horse's village, 30 more people, old men, old women, and children froze to death. Crazy Horse's people continued to fight throughout the winter, but by the spring of 1877, they were tired of fighting. They were out of ammunition. There were not enough buffalo. The people were hungry, and the women and children were cold. Just too tired of being cold and hungry, and no ammunition. So here's this other unbelievable scene, guys. Imagine being a soldier, and you're down at Fort Robinson in northwestern Nebraska, and you get to witness this another epochal moment in history. Crazy Horse's people have finally agreed to surrender, and you're witnessing it. So here comes a mile-long procession of gaunt, skinny ponies and gaunt and skinny, dressed in rags people, 1.5 miles long, and they're coming into Fort Robinson. And the soldiers are witnessing this, and as if they would use the words we'd use today, they're going, what's wrong with this picture? Because these people were singing. They're writing home to their wives. Why are they singing? We don't understand. They're acting like this is a procession instead of a surrender. The reason they were singing was because the officer to whom they had surrendered Remember, General George Crook, remember the battle where the sister saved her brother? He had told the envoys, you know, the negotiations, Crazy Horse's envoys, in the peace negotiations that transpired over the month of April, that they could have an agency of their own here in the Powder River country. Now, the people knew that the buffalo were on their way out. All they wanted to do was live their lives as long as they could as free people. And now it seemed as though all the suffering that they had been through was not to be in vain. They were going to be able to do that. Right. But remember what Red Cloud said. He said the white man made us many promises, but he only kept one of them. Well, it wasn't this one. Within a few months, Crazy Horse was murdered or assassinated. The Indian people are all being imprisoned on the reservations. And you might say, probably none of you listening to this right now would say, what we did was good, it was right, and it needed to happen. But every single one of you might say, listen, it's sick, it's sad, it's horrible, but this is just the way life is. Call it the crocodile part of the brain, call it human nature, but if you put two groups of people together, one of them's going to beat up the other one, and that's just the way it is. Well, if you say that, my goodness, history is replete with sufficient examples to justify that position, so I would say, okay. But if by some chance you go, I don't know, I just don't know, it didn't have to be that way, then I would say to you, challenge you, it's nothing more than just an intellectual experiment to say, ask yourself, how might this country be today if we had done it differently? How might, for instance, our thinking about economics be? Might you know, how we decide what is yours and what is mine? Or our ideas about economics or foreign policy or the environment, might we be less likely to treat the earth like a business in liquidation and more likely to see it as something sacred? Okay, guys, thank you so very much.